viewers, my name is Damilare. In this lesson, we'll be looking at the topic cellular respiration. The first word, cellular, that's where we got cell, meaning unit of life, meaning everything that has to do with life in humans as a result of cell. We are able to see because there is cell in our eye. We are able to walk because there is cell in our bones, in our body, and the likes. Now, respiration has to do with breakdown of glucose to give energy. This glucose is from the food we eat, so meaning that food is needed by the cell so that there will be a breaking down of that food to give energy, and that energy will now be used by that living cell or living thing for different activities. Now let's start with respiration. That's the process by which assimilated simple sugar, once we talk of simple sugar, we're talking about glucose. So how it will be broken down in a stepwise series of chemical reaction. In short, the stepwise series of chemical reaction, they are 10 in number. So meaning that respiration will take a series of processes before it gets to the final stage, just like in a quarry where you have a big rock. That big rock will first be broken into small rock. The small rock will be broken into smaller one until you get to pieces. So that is why we say it has series of chemical reaction whenever we are doing our respiration to produce energy. Also, carbon dioxide and water can also be released as byproducts. Now, still looking at cellular respiration. So the key word there is cell. It means it will take place in the cell. That means the breakdown of this glucose will take place in the cell, especially in the mitochondria of the cell. You know, when you look at, for example, animal cell, so we have what we call cytoplasm. All this body surface of the cell is the cytoplasm. That's where other organelles are arranged. So it means inside the cytoplasm there will be breakdown of glucose. Also, we have mitochondria, the one that has something like this, like a zigzag inside it. So inside that mitochondria, glucose is also broken down. So that's why they say it is in the cell. Cellular respiration, breakdown of glucose to give energy in the cell, and that energy is in form of chemical energy which will be used for various activities or various works. So this is the chemical reaction where the glucose with the oxygen, that's the air we breathe in, is oxygen, so it will break the glucose and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Then water will also be released, and this is the energy, 38 ATP. Take note of this 38 ATP. 2 is always the first ATP at the first stage, then 36 as the final stage. That's for aerobic. But when it comes to anaerobic, then it will just be only 2. So we still get to know about that. So different types of cellular respiration. Looking at aerobic, that's the one that involve oxygen. From the word aero, aero is air or oxygen. So meaning that when oxygen is used or utilized in our breaking down, in our oxidation of sugar, then that is aerobic respiration. But if oxygen is not used for the breakdown, that's anaerobic. So this is the chemical reaction for aerobic. Take note, there is carbon dioxide, there is water, there is energy in the product of aerobic respiration. So the energy that is now formed, where will it be stored and in what form? So it will be stored in the cell, and it will be stored in form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That means 3 phosphorus. So though we have the one of diphosphate, but the ADP, adenosine diphosphate, extra phosphorus would have been added to it in the process of phosphorylation to become ATP. Now let's look at the first stage of aerobic, because aerobic has 2 stages. Likewise anaerobic. The first stage of aerobic, it will take place in the cytoplasm. That means the surface of that cell where other organelles are arranged. So that's where it will take place. And that process of the breaking down that takes place in the cytoplasm is called glycolysis. That means when the glucose is being broken in the cytoplasm, that is glycolysis. You can remember with SIS series. Use this to remember. That means this glycolysis is a series of chemical reaction. Letter C for the chemical. So series of chemical reaction whereby the letter G, glucose, will be broken to pyruvic. You know, from the spelling of pyruvic we can get Y. So it means series of chemical reaction whereby glucose will be broken into pyruvic acid, and there are 10. So that means the series of reactions, there are 10 in number. Use this O and this L to remember, as if you are writing 1 and 0. Okay, so that's the first stage of aerobic respiration, which takes place in the cytoplasm, and we call it glycolysis. So you can see the definition: series of reaction in respiration by which glucose is broken down. And take note, they use the word incompletely broken down, because if only 2 ATP is released, that's not enough. So they need enough energy, so it's still incomplete. So it will first give us pyruvic acid. Pyruvic is a 3-carbon compound. The glucose, which is the starting point, is a 6-carbon compound. Glucose is a 6-carbon compound, but the pyruvic is a 3-carbon compound. So meaning that it has not completely broken the glucose. So glycolysis, once again, is an incomplete breaking of glucose, so through series of processes. Okay, so now let's look at the chemical reaction. This is the chemical reaction for that glycolysis, whereby the glucose will be broken in the presence of oxygen. And this is the first thing to give us. This is the pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid. So pyruvic acid has 3 carbons, 1, 2, 3. Then this H. So, or let's put it in this way. This is a chemical, the open chain structure. CH3 will be here, C will be here, double bond with our O will be here, then COOH. So double bond will be here, O will be here, then OH. So that is our pyruvic acid. So this pyruvic acid, it means it has 3 carbon. So take note, 1, 2, 3, 3 carbons. Then it has a carbonyl, CO here, and carboxyl group here. So that's the pyruvic acid, which is the 3-carbon compound, 1, 2, 3. So still looking at the first stage of the aerobic respiration, which we call glycolysis. So whereby pyruvic acid is formed, and we said it's incomplete. Now let's move to the second phase of this same aerobic respiration. What do we have in the second phase? So this one is one that follows the glycolysis. So, and it is referred to as the Krebs cycle, or you call it citric acid cycle. So this is when that pyruvic acid is now complete. It means once it gets to this second stage, you can see it's now complete. So completely broken down to form CO2 and water. Just as we said, when we breathe in oxygen, we must breathe out carbon dioxide. So it means by the time the pyruvic acid is broken down, carbon dioxide will be given off, and also water will be produced. And Krebs cycle takes place in the presence of oxygen, and during this phase further energy is released. The energy that was not complete, that it was only 2 before, so it will now release more of the energy. So you can see that same pyruvic acid again continuing is breaking down. So it means more oxygen, then in addition there will be hydrogen added to it. So why is hydrogen added to it? This is just like there's something we call electron transfer, or transport of electron. So in this process, hydrogen is always being added. So, and once hydrogen is being added, then expect water to be removed. So take note, carbon dioxide is always being formed. That's what we call decarboxylation. So it means as we move to the second phase of aerobic respiration, which we call Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, there will always be a release of carbon dioxide. Why? Because the oxygen that was taken in will merge with carbon and bring out carbon dioxide, also merge with hydrogen and bring out water. So then the energy, the remaining energy, will also be released, because they are breaking the fragment of the glucose, which was pyruvic acid. It will now finalize the breaking, and enough energy will be released, which is 36 ATP. Now let's proceed with Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle. The Krebs cycle consists of a series of chemical reactions. So just like from the glycolysis also having series of chemical reaction, Krebs also has series of chemical reaction proceeding step by step, but its own will be going in cyclic form. It will be going round, so under aerobic condition. So it was H.A. Krebs, so an English biochemist, that explained this. So in this cycle, each reaction is regulated by specific respiratory enzymes. It means there are some enzymes that are working with respiration. We call them respiratory enzymes. And some of the enzymes, we have the one we call exokinase. Exo from hexagon 6. So exokinase is an enzyme that will work with glycolysis. kinase. So though there are still many other enzymes, and apart from enzyme, we also have coenzyme. So we still mention them as we proceed. So just take note that there is what? Respiratory enzymes in the process of this cycle, and also in the process of glycolysis. Now the Krebs cycle now is when we now take this in the mitochondria. Remember, glycolysis we take this in the cytoplasm, but Krebs cycle we take this in the mitochondria. So the overall reaction now, that means when we combine both the 2 and the 36 together, it will give us 38, and that's why you can see the final result 38. The CO2 and the water, they are the major products. So now we can see the two things I've just talked about under aerobic. So in aerobic, we say we have this glycolysis and there is Krebs cycle. So this is the series of chemical reaction that takes place in glycolysis, whereby the glucose being a 6-carbon compound, so there will be a release of energy, ATP. So we said there will be 2. So the ATP will be 2 ATP. So, and you can see here the first root ADP, that means diphosphate. But because of the presence of phosphorus, the di will turn to tri. So, and this will take place in 10 ways. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So it means that we have 10 series of chemical reaction in glycolysis. So you can see the glucose will start breaking down. So glucose 6 phosphates, fructose 6 phosphates, fructose 6 diphosphate, glyceride di 3 phosphate, and so on. So that's just a series of breakdown. Now once it's done with that, it moves to the next phase, which we call Krebs cycle, also known as citric acid cycle. So in this citric acid cycle, take note of these mnemonics. That's CGP, then AKOE, just like cumulative grade points in university, your results CGPA, or your average cumulative grade points average, then KOE. So you can just say PAKO, like PAKO. So CGPA KOE. Now what's the meaning of the C? Meaning that the first place where the breakdown of glucose will take place is cytoplasm. So, and that's during what? Glycolysis, letter G. So during glycolysis, which is series of breakdown of glucose through different chemical reaction. Then the letter P. Then take note of what I also used the other time from the spelling of glycolysis. So meaning that the SIS means, use it to remember series. So series of what? Letter C, chemical reaction. Series of chemical reaction. Then G and Y, use it to remember conversion of glucose to pyruvic. The Y as if you add P to pyruvic acid. So then letter P, so is the pyruvic acid itself. So where glucose will be converted to pyruvic, a 3-carbon compounds. So then A is now acetyl coenzyme A, acetyl coenzyme A. So what does that mean? So because as you can see from it, this is acetic acid, meaning that once you move away from this glycolysis, there will be a formation of acetic acid, which is a 2-carbon. Remember that pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon compound. We started from 6 to 3, then to 2, meaning that they are breaking. So once it gets to acetic acid, the 2-carbon compound, there will be addition of a coenzyme. So it was a coenzyme that joined this acetic acid, and the name of that coenzyme is a coenzyme A. So they call it a linked coenzyme. So this coenzyme is always linking chemicals together. So from this linking, so the acetic acid and the coenzyme will now become acetic coenzyme A. Now from that, after the letter A, then K, Krebs cycle. Meaning from this acetic coenzyme A, it will enter this cycle, which we call Krebs cycle. And another letter is O. That means there will be oxidation. So oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidation means oxygen will be added. So there will be addition of oxygen. So, and since there will be addition of oxygen, then there will be release of carbon dioxide. That's why you can see carbon dioxide moving out because oxygen has been added to this reaction. So the oxidative phosphorylation, so meaning there will be release of carbon dioxide. Then there will also be electron transport, so whereby electron will be gained, and that's why there's another coenzyme which we call NAD plus and NADH. So this NADH so is very high in aerobic, but it is low in anaerobic. So that's nicotinamide adenine diphosphate. This hydrogen is from deficient electron. So and take note of this NADH, that once it changes to NAD plus, they call it generation, it's always generated. So it's always being generated as the reaction is going on, it will be generated. Then later it will turn to NAD plus. So NAD plus, so which will be regenerated. So this one is always being regenerated so that you go and start glycolysis again. So that is for the operation of this citric acid cycle. So as we continue, so that means from this the K, which we call Krebs cycle, so the next thing is citric acid. So citric acid is a 6 carbon compound. So later it will turn to 5, that's ketoglutaric acid, to 4 succinic acid, 4 malic acid, 4 oxaloacetic acid. So all this breakdown process will take place in the Krebs cycle. And take note, if sufficient oxygen is available, remember we are still doing aerobic, so if it is sufficient, if it's enough, each molecule of the pyruvic acid or pyruvate will be oxidized to remove 1 molecule of carbon 4 oxide. So like I said earlier, that because oxygen is coming here, so it will be removing carbon 4 oxide. So removing carbon 4 oxide means decarboxylation. It will be forming 1 molecule of acetic acid. 1 molecule of acetic acid. So the acetic acid will combine with coenzyme, so called coenzyme A. So which I've talked about earlier, that it will this is the acetic acid here. It was attached to what? Coenzyme. So coenzyme A combined with it. So when it combines with the coenzyme, so we call it coenzyme A to form acetocoenzyme A. So the acetocoenzyme A then enters the citric acid or Krebs cycle. So it is the acetocoenzyme A. It's just like getting key. So this, call this CoA as if it's a key to enter this citric acid cycle. So the acetocoenzyme A will launch the reaction into citric acid, and then the cycle continues. So that's just how it operates. Now there are some questions here, so maybe later we attend to those questions so that we can test our knowledge of what we have learned so far. Now we are moving to the second type of respiration, which we call anaerobic. Now what is the meaning of anaerobic? An means no or not. So that means there is no what? Oxygen, or absence. So absence of oxygen, meaning that it's possible for glucose to break without oxygen. So in this type of cellular respiration, glucose is what? Broken down. It's still inside the cell because we are still dealing with cellular respiration, but there is absence of oxygen. Now this one, some cases it will give us carbon 4 oxide, and it can give us alcohol, and our energy will still be there, 2 ATP. Remember, every first stage is always 2 ATP, and that's glycolysis stage. So mean that anaerobic also starts with glycolysis stage, exactly like aerobic. So this is the glucose, so forming what? Ethanol. So its own product is ethanol. Instead of just carbon dioxide and water, this one will give us ethanol and carbon dioxide, and the energy will be there. So examples of organisms that will undergo anaerobic respiration, we have yeast, like in palm wine. So this yeast will take the glucose or sugar in the palm wine and then ferment it. So once it ferments it, it will turn into alcohol, and that's why there is a name they call this yeast. So they call it the Saccharomyces. So Saccharomyces, why did they call it saccharo? From saccharin. saccharin, sugar. So then myces is fungi. It means is a fungi that act on glucose, on sugar, so to break it into alcohol. So that is for in the absence of oxygen. So there's also a bacteria. So we call that one from the word bacilli. Remember, bacilli is a bacteria. So we have this lacts. Lact is milk. So if I say lactobacillus, it means this bacteria always form milk sugar. So lactobacillus, so it always form milk sugar, and that's from yogurt or cheese. So it will break it down, break the yogurt, so to form lactic acid, that's that lactobacillus. But yeast, this one will form alcohol. So they are and then all certain fungi also are still there doing this anaerobic respiration, and that's why even in our mouth we have some bacteria that are not dangerous, that are useful to the body. So they call them endoparasites, means they are within. So there are still some other endoparasites also that can do anaerobic. Tapeworm can do anaerobic, roundworm can do anaerobic respiration. So from what I've said earlier about the anaerobic respiration of yeasts, that I said yeast can form alcohol in your palm wine. So they call it alcoholic fermentation. To ferment the sugar that is in that palm wine. So in this process, the glucose will be converted to pyruvic acid. That means that's glycolysis, the first stage that took place in aerobic. So glucose will be converted to pyruvic acid, a 3-carbon compound. So this pyruvic acid will now be reduced to ethanol. Ethanol is a 2-carbon compound, C2H5OH. So it will be reduced to this ethanol. Now by what? By the acceptance of hydrogen. So it means when we are talking of how water will be produced, it means there is an operation of hydrogen in the process. An operation of hydrogen in the process. Even though this one here does not involve water, but that of the aerobic. So we saw water. So and the reason why the water was there was because of the acceptance of hydrogen. So where is this hydrogen coming from? From the NADH. That means our coenzyme nicotinamide adenine diphosphate. So the H is just telling us about the deficiency of hydrogen or electron. So still on this anaerobic, so we have seen the glycolysis, so whereby the glucose will be broken to pyruvic acid, but the pyruvic will still now proceed. That means this is now the second stage. His own second stage, instead of going into Krebs cycle, his own is going into fermentation. So meaning that his own is number 1 glycolysis, number 2 fermentation. So his own fermentation to be reduced to ethanol, that's alcohol. So or it should be reduced to lactic acid. So for ethanol, so it means it will accept hydrogen. So once it accepts hydrogen, it's accepting it from NADH, the one that has hydrogen. So this is the result here. So this is a glucose. The first stage is what? Glycolysis. So whereby we say it will be broken into pyruvic acid. So then take notes, we said hydrogen will also later be added. This hydrogen is coming from NADH, nicotinamide adenine diphosphate, with a deficiency of hydrogen. So that's where the hydrogen is coming from. So then it will release 2 ATP. Remember, every glycolysis will give us 2 ATP. Now second step, which I call the fermentation. So that pyruvic acid, remember that we said there will be hydrogen gotten from this NADH, so from the coenzyme, that means supporting enzyme. And in short, what is the essence of enzyme? Enzyme is to speed up the reaction. You know, when we talk of respiration, breakdown of glucose to give energy. Energy must quickly be given in our body. So and that's why enzyme will speed it up. Coenzyme will support it. So this coenzyme now, NADH, it will release the H to the pyruvic acid and it will turn to alcohol or ethanol. So which is this. And then at the same time, there will be a decarboxylation. Carbon dioxide will be released and the NADH will now reduce to NAD+. So this NAD+ will now do the work of regeneration. It will regenerate and go back to what? To the beginning, to go and start another glycolysis. Now, From the still on the second stage, which is fermentation, I've said there is alcoholic fermentation, which is done by yeast. There is also lactic acid fermentation. So in this one, there will be no carbon dioxide formed. Remember here we said there is a decarbonization, carbon dioxide is formed, but here no carbon dioxide. So what will now happen to the pyruvic acid? Immediately the hydrogen from the NADH is added, is when we change straight to lactic acid instead of alcohol, and then the NAD plus will still be there, which will be the one that will be regenerated, so that it will go and start the glycolysis again. Now on the lactic acid fermentation, don't forget lact is milk, so it occurs in the cell of human where there is no enough oxygen. And when we say in human, okay, let's still get some points here before I add to it. So it's not enough oxygen available for aerobic stage respiration. So lactic acid fermentation, it occurs in some bacteria which live in anaerobic habitats, anywhere there is no air, like bottom of the pond, bottom of the sea, there is no oxygen there. So it means there will be anaerobic respiration, and the product will be lactic acid. So in the muscle of man, when man is doing exercise, so and also animals, after they have run, that's fast race, they do strenuous exercise, so there will be no enough oxygen for the muscle, so to complete the breaking of the glucose. So what will now happen? Lactic acid will be formed, and the energy that will be produced will be little. So this lactic acid will accumulate, it can even weaken the muscle. So the increase in the level of acidity in that muscle will cause muscle fatigue. So because acid will increase inside that muscle, since there is no enough oxygen, so the acid level will rise, and is that the rising of the acid that will make the muscle become fatigued and cramp. So the athletes will now recover when oxygen is carried to that muscle cell later, so that it can go and break that lactic acid, because the lactic acid will be hurtful to the person's muscle. So because there is no oxygen, but immediately the muscle oxygen comes, it will break the lactic acid, convert it back to pyruvic acid, which is good, which is useful. So and that one will now oxidize it by the supply of the oxygen, then can now give out normal carbon dioxide, water and energy. So what have we brought out from this is that from the second stage of anaerobic, we have lactic acid fermentation, we also have alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic is for the yeast, so which will break the glucose into alcohol, but lactic acid will break the glucose into the lactic acid. So the glucose will be broken into lactic acid, which is always in an environment where there is no enough oxygen, like under the water, like in the muscle of a man after running race, that there is no enough air for the man, so which will increase the acidity of that man's muscle, so causing muscle fatigue. So until the man gets enough oxygen, which will break the lactic acid and convert it back to pyruvic acid, so that the oxygen will now break the pyruvic acid and produce the normal carbon dioxide, water and energy. There's something we call oxygen depth. Where there is no enough oxygen, that's oxygen depth. Like when athletes just finish doing a strenuous exercise, so there will be no enough of oxygen, so that's why there will be much lactic acid. So once lactic acid is built up, causing muscle to ache, oxygen is needed to remove that lactic acid. So and that's what we call oxygen depth. And there's something we call residual air. That's the amount of air that remains in lung when you breathe out. So all the air in your lungs will not come out, so the remaining one will be there to sustain that lungs. And when you now breathe in, it will make the amount of air coming into the lungs increase, so that there will be enough air going to the blood stream. So we have looked at the aerobic and the anaerobic aspects of the respiration. So let's also look at certain conditions under which glycogen can be converted to glucose to produce energy. During exercise, the body must have used up the glucose, so that's when the glycogen, if there is glycogen in the person's body, So remember, glycogen is always being stored when there's too much glucose. So, but if the person is doing exercise, that glycogen will convert back to glucose. Then when there's low glucose level, when the glucose level is very low, especially when you are starved, you are not eating, or you are sick, or you are fasting, so it means it will convert the glycogen to glucose. Or when your adrenal level is high, you are using more of your adrenaline, so it will consume your glucose, so you will need glycogen. So all this energy we are getting, or ATP, from this glycolysis and the likes, what are they using them for? That's all the activities. You want to swim, run, and so on, you need that energy. Nerve impulse, messages in our body connecting to the brain, is as a result of energy. Also, heat being generated in your body is from energy. Electric fish that is showing electricity, so it's as a result of what? That energy that is being produced through respiration. Active transport, when you get active transport, that's when the substances that is moving in our body, that is beyond the gradient, concentration gradient. So substance moving in our body beyond concentration gradient. Example is when you look at sodium to potassium, so they always move. When you look at calcium, also moves in our body. Glucose, amino acid, they move. So when they are now moving in opposite direction, that's active transport. For example, normally anything that is from a large surface, that's where there is a flow to a lower surface. But once a movement is moving from a lower to higher surface, it will be difficult, and that's what we call active transport. It's just like saying someone is very strong climbing a mountain. So, or when water is flowing into the tree, so it can be in form of active transport. So they use that energy for active transport. Also lights, all these fireflies, so they can also use the ATP to produce their fire. So if you want to manufacture protein, starch, you need that energy. So cell division, you need the energy. So these are different questions also that you can still answer under this topic. So we have also looked at aerobic and anaerobic. You can differentiate that aerobic needs oxygen, anaerobic does not need. This one, the energy will be very high. That's close to 38 altogether, 2 plus 36. But this one is just the 2. That means just the first stage. Then this one, it occurs in plants and animal. But anaerobic, bacteria, fungi, all those cells in our muscle, so they undergo it. Then this one will produce CO2, this one will produce water. This one will produce CO2, and it will produce either alcohol or lactic acid. So then and take note of this, that it's not all of them that produce carbon dioxide. When it comes to fermentation of lactic acid, so this lactic acid fermentation, it will not produce carbon dioxide. So but the alcoholic fermentation will produce carbon dioxide. You can use the O to remember carbon dioxide. So during alcoholic fermentation, there will be carbon dioxide, but lactic acid fermentation, no carbon dioxide. So sugar, glue, or glucose is oxidized completely. This one will complete is breaking down. So but this one, it will not be, it will be partial in the production. And take note of difference between gaseous and aerobic respiration. So gaseous external is when you are breathing in, breathing out, that one is external. But aerobic is internal, where energy will be broken. So the food we are using to produce all those energy, they are very useful, helping us to grow, helping us to produce hormones and enzymes for all those respiration. So then there is a similarities between aerobic and anaerobic. Both of them, they actually occur in cytoplasm, not mitochondria. So because they both start with glycolysis, so they occur in cytoplasm, but only aerobic will proceed to mitochondria. So both of them will involve breakdown of simple sugar, that means glycolysis, to pyruvic acid. Both of them will convert pyruvic acid to energy. So their main goal will be achieved. They will produce energy. Then respiratory enzymes, they make use of respiratory enzymes and coenzymes. So in both cases, carbon dioxide is the byproduct of both of them. So except lactic acid, the one I said in lactic acid fermentation, carbon dioxide will not be produced. So both reactions, they have their own byproducts. So these are some experiments related to respiration, whereby you can take caustic soda, use it to trap air. There is carbon dioxide in air. Then once the carbon dioxide gets to the lime water, it will turn it to milky substance. And what is that milky substance? Remember, carbon dioxide So once you mix this with carbon dioxide, calcium hydroxide, CaOH2. So what will happen? The Ca will just join with the CO to form limestone. So that limestone is the milky substance. So this milky substance now, so if you want to if you keep adding more of carbon dioxide, it means it will turn to bicarbonate, Ca, calcium hydrogen triazocarbonate 4. So we should be colorless. So then this rat you see here is just telling you that it can produce, as it's breathing out, carbon dioxide will be coming out of its nostril and entering the lime water, it will turn milky. So that's just what this experiment is all about. So these are also some questions you can answer under this topic. So this is just my own write-up to summarize everything, so you can patiently look at the write-up to see or to summarize all I've said so far. As you can see from here, this glucose that I said there is incomplete breaking, so to give us the lactic acid. So that's one in the muscle when there is no enough oxygen. So, and we can also call that animal fermentation, because the lact is milk, which is in animal, so you can call it animal fermentation. So, and this can also take place in the muscle, so causing fatigue. Then I've talked about carbon dioxide, how it will turn milky. Then, and also when it is more, how it become colorless. So then another thing is plant fermentation. So that's when I talked about palm wine, how the yeast, so which is the Saccharomyces, how it will appear as a catalyst. That means speeding up the breaking, the yeast will be speeding up the breaking of the glucose and converting it to alcohol and carbon dioxide. So we call it alcoholic fermentation. And we said, then take note of this, that most energy is from fats. We are dealing with respiration, which has to do with energy. So most energy is from fat. Like if you look at camel, in their hump, that's the one at their back, it's actually fat that is there, not water. So the fat normally melts into to produce energy, and also water will be produced in the process. So that's for the energy from the fats. So when you see that the muscle of athlete is fatigued, is because there is accumulation of lactic acid. There is no oxygen to take in, so it will just form the lactic acid, and even the acid level will rise. So athletes, another question is, why is that athletes they take glucose rather than taking solid food or corn? So because that glucose is the simplest sugar, so it will give them energy very fast. So their respiration energy, so we call it ATP. So we said they have the one that is in mitochondria, especially the second phase of aerobic. So these are just repetition of what I've said earlier. So CO2 is not given out in photosynthesis. Take note that photosynthesis has to do with absorbing. They will absorb carbon dioxide, they are not giving it out. So especially in the day when there is sun, so to form glucose, they collect the CO2 to form glucose. But that same CO2 they have received to form glucose, they are still going to give it out when they are doing respiration. That means breaking down. When they are breaking down what they have gathered, so they will now release the CO2, and that's at night. They will release the CO2, so where there is no light. So but respiration, that one is catabolism of glucose, forming CO2, water, and ATP. So decay also can release CO2. It's also catabolism, breaking like respiration. So decay, burning substance, so they are all catabolism, they can all release carbon dioxide. So this is the differences I was talking about between aerobic and anaerobic. So you can just say CGP and then AKOE. Then this one CGP, phlegmy. The C means aerobic respiration will start from the cytoplasm, so where that's letter C. So where glycolysis, that's letter G, will occur. And from the spelling of glycolysis, remember series. So series of what? Letter O, oxidation. So I will say it is what? Partial. So it is partial. That means there will be no, the breaking down of glucose is not yet complete. It will still continue later. So but presently it will still convert to pyruvic acid or pyruvate, and that's letter P. so which is a 3-carbon compound. Pyruvate is actually short form of pyruvic acid. Then it will later change to acetyl coenzyme A. So that's letter A. So acetyl coenzyme A, which is a coenzyme. A coenzyme. So this was as a result of acetic acid joining with coenzyme. So then from this acetyl coenzyme A, it will now move to Krebs cycle. So where we have lactic acid and the likes. So finally, it will now complete is breaking down in what? In the mitochondria. It started from the cytoplasm. So the breakdown of glucose will now be in mitochondria, where Krebs cycle occurs. Electron transports from this letter O, oxidative phosphorylation, and E, electron transport. So, and that's in the inner mitochondria. But when you look at anaerobic, we say this one will occur entirely in the cytoplasm. So no mitochondria in this one. So the breakdown will be in the cytoplasm. So starting with glycolysis, so which will be converting the glucose to pyruvic acid, and it will also be releasing 2 ATP. So and then from there we jump to fermentation. So from glycolysis to fermentation, to ferment to lactic acid or to alcohol. So the one of lactic acid is for mussel. So why alcohol? That's for yeast in palm wine. So and then there is a kind of regeneration of NAD plus. So that NAD plus is the one that will regenerate and then cause another glycolysis to continue. So that's for the difference there. Then similarities between aerobic and anaerobic. So both of them normally pass through what we call cytoplasm. That means initially they will start with this cytoplasm. So and both of them will involve glycolysis. That means they will break down glucose to pyruvic acid. And both of them will produce ATP, either 2 or 36. They will surely produce ATP. Then both of them will involve respiratory enzymes. So there are different enzymes they will release. And what is the work of the enzyme? To catalyze each of the reactions. Since it has almost 10 reactions, so the enzyme will speed up all those 10 reactions. Like exokinase, you can use 6 to remember. So since we are dealing with glucose, so exokinase is an enzyme that can be used. Phosphofructokinase from the word fructose, also 6 carbon. So use it for glycolysis. So that's another enzyme. Then there's something we call lactate dehydrogenase, another enzyme. Lactate dehydrogenase. That one is for lactic acid. It's another enzyme. So enzyme, when there is lactic acid fermentation, that enzyme will be produced. So then we now have coenzyme. Co is like my fellow person to assist. So to assist an assisting enzyme. So what will it do? Will be carrying electron or chemical group during reaction. So coenzymes, example like the NAD plus. So we use this one for glycolysis. So after it has accepted electron, so it will now form NADH. So the NAD plus is regenerated to continue glycolysis, especially in lactic acid fermentation. So another coenzyme we have apart from NAD, we also have FAD, that's flavin adenine dinucleotide. So they use this one for Krebs cycle. So it's also a coenzyme. They use it in the Krebs cycle. After accepting electron, it will form FADH, to mean that they always accept electron. That's from the electron transport. Then we also have another coenzyme called coenzyme A. So the one I said will be reacting with the acetyl. So before it enter Krebs cycle, so that's coenzyme A. It will react with acetyl and form acetyl coenzyme A. So which is for link reaction. So both of them have carbon dioxide byproducts, except in lactic acid. So this is the lactobacillus I talked about. Lactic acid fermentation. So in the mussel, unlike alcohol fermentation of yeast in palm wine, which produces CO. So and this is Saccharomyces I talked about. So from the one that we that's the fungi that will convert that will break the yogurt or anything that has to do with yogurt or cheese. So the yogurt and cheese is for lactobacillus, while the Saccharomyces, that's for yeast. So turning palm wine to alcohol. So from difference, if you want to differentiate aerobic and anaerobic we have 2 ATP, anaerobic only 2 ATP. Aerobic we have both 2 and 36. 2 at the first stage, 36 at the second stage. Then aerobic will require only oxygen, but anaerobic doesn't require oxygen. Also aerobic, it will give us CO2 and water, but anaerobic will give us alcohol, CO2 and energy. So and sometimes it will be lactic acid instead of alcohol. So this is just the summary. Then let me show you some diagram that can help you to remember what we have talked about. This is glucose, always the starting point of respiration. Glycolysis, that's the first stage. Either is aerobic, either this is anaerobic, this is aerobic. So both of them will undergo glycolysis. This is pyruvate. They will break down into pyruvate, 3 carbon compound. So for the anaerobic, that pyruvate will now fermentation into lactic acid and then alcohol. But for the aerobic, that pyruvate will not just stop there. It will still continue into what? Krebs cycle, and where we have the electron transport chain. So that's what that diagram is talking about. There's still another diagram here talking about how our glucose, this is our glucose, will undergo glycolysis. So whereby remember I said when we have ADP, adenosine diphosphate, additional phosphate is one that will turn it to adenosine triphosphate, and that's 2. So at the first stage there's always 2 energy, 2 ATP. So that's for that diagram there. Then I also talked about NAD, which is the coenzyme, NAD plus NADH, that when there is additional or when there's gain of hydrogen, so it will become NADH. So that's what that diagram is talking about. So and this is a pyruvate, the pyruvic acid that we say is always 3 carbon. So 3 carbon, it has a carbonyl and it also has a carboxylic group here. So that's for that diagram. So let's see if there is more diagram we can also use. So this one is still saying the same thing. Glycolysis, how glucose will turn to pyruvic acid, release 2 energy. So for aerobic, it will go to Krebs cycle, so where there will be electron transport. And take note, carbon dioxide will be released. That means decarboxylation, because of the presence of the oxygen, so it will bring out carbon dioxide. So then the final, in the Krebs cycle, 36 ATP will be formed and water will also be formed. So that's from that diagram. So here they are also confirming different ATP that are formed. So this is one of the enzyme, exokinase, like I talked about earlier. So then this drawing here also is another explanation. This is a glucose, a 6 carbon. If you count this in there as a 6 carbon compound that will later turn to 3 carbon compound, which is pyruvic acid, and there are always 2 moles of that pyruvic acid. So once this glucose is broken, so the to pyruvic acid, this is the 2 ATP that will be released, starting from ADP to turn to ATP. Now take note of how NAD will turn to NADH. That means there will be addition of hydrogen to form NADH, but this will be regenerated and come back again so that glycolysis can continue. Excuse me. So this pyruvic acid, so remember in anaerobic, it will turn to lactic acid or it should turn to ethanol. In ethanol, from the sound O, it means it will produce carbon dioxide, but for lactic acid it will not produce carbon dioxide. So I think with this we have been able to look at what cellular respiration is. So thanks for listening.